For 83 excruciating days, a young woman clawed at the dirt walls of a coffin-sized box, buried deep beneath the earth. No one could hear her screams. Above her, the man who buried her watched the news with a smile, knowing the world was looking in all the wrong places. ChatGPT said. Elise Harper had no idea that someone had been watching her for weeks. Every morning, as she walked from her shared apartment to the downtown coffee shop where she worked, a pair of quiet eyes followed from behind tinted windows. At the shop, he always sat in the same corner seat near the window, sipping black coffee, sometimes with a notepad, sometimes with a laptop. He smiled politely when she served him. His face was unremarkable, middle-aged, clean-shaven, pale, balding with wire-rimmed glasses. He blended in perfectly. That was his talent. And that was why no one suspected that Victor Doss was orchestrating one of the most disturbing kidnappings in recent history. Victor wasn't a lunatic in the conventional sense. He was calculated, composed, and intensely observant. A former mechanical engineer with a degree in behavioral psychology, he lived alone in a cabin outside city limits. On the surface he was quiet, even forgettable. But his mind was a place of dark precision, where emotions had no room and control was everything. He had long been fascinated by isolation and the human mind's response to prolonged sensory deprivation. Elise was not his first fixation, but she was the first he believed he could perfectly control. She became a part of his plan not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She was ordinary, predictable, polite. She followed the same route home every day, rarely changed her routine, and had no close family nearby. Her social media gave him all the details he needed: when she worked, when she rested, when she met friends, when she was most alone. He created a digital map of her life. And when the moment came, he struck with surgical precision. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when Elise vanished. She left the coffee shop just after 7 p.m. and was never seen again. There were no signs of struggle, no broken umbrella or dropped phone. She simply disappeared. The police suspected voluntary disappearance at first. Maybe she ran off. Maybe she needed space. But her coworkers knew better. Elise had no reason to run. She was grounded, responsible. She had recently been accepted into a graduate program and was excited about her future. Victor had waited for the right moment. He followed her in his van, one equipped with soundproof walls and a false floor. He had rehearsed it in his head dozens of times. As she passed through a poorly lit alley that cut behind a row of small shops, a shortcut she always took, he moved fast. A chloroform-soaked cloth, a quick grab, and she was unconscious before she could scream. She was loaded into the van within seconds, the alley silent again as though nothing had happened. He drove her to the outskirts, to a small patch of land he had purchased under a different name. It appeared to be an abandoned storage property, fenced in and cluttered with rusted equipment. But underground he had spent the last year building something unimaginable. A reinforced steel box, 10 feet below the surface, with airflow systems, timed lighting, surveillance cameras, and a voice interaction module he had coded himself. Everything was ready. Every detail had been tested. The moment he placed Elise inside, the experiment began. Victor kept a journal, a meticulous record of her reactions, her patterns, her moments of panic and hope. He wasn't just keeping her alive, he was studying her like a lab subject. How many days would it take before she lost track of time? When would she start to hallucinate? What phrases triggered fear and which created calm? He measured her resistance to despair like a scientist taking notes on chemical reactions. He posed as concerned onlooker in town. He visited the cafe once more a few days after the news of her disappearance broke, offering condolences to her co-workers, listening in on the gossip, noting how little progress the police had made. He even attended a community search party, walking silently among volunteers with flashlights and flyers, knowing all along where she was. The police were running out of leads. Her phone had gone dead the night she vanished. Her social media accounts had been dormant. Security camera footage around her route showed nothing unusual. Victor had parked his van just outside the range of cameras, knew which lights were faulty, and timed everything to avoid witnesses. It was as if Elise had been erased. Meanwhile, under 10 feet of dirt and concrete, Elise woke up in pitch darkness. The air smelled stale and metallic. She tried to move but felt confined. Her cries echoed off the steel walls. There was no answer. No sound. Then, after an hour of screaming, a mechanical voice spoke through a speaker above her. "You are safe. Do not panic. You are part of something bigger now." Victor watched her reaction on his monitor in the cabin above, noting the exact second her sobs turned to silent confusion. He marked it in his journal. Day 1. Subject begins breakdown phase. We'll test vocal triggers tomorrow. This was no crime of passion. This was architecture, psychological, physical, and disturbingly methodical. Elise was not the victim of a madman. She was the center of an experiment designed by someone who believed he was creating something meaningful, by burying someone alive. Elise woke to suffocating darkness, her lungs straining for air that tasted stale and filtered. At first she couldn't remember what had happened, only that she had been walking home in the rain. Now she was lying flat, her arms brushing against metal walls that closed in on all sides. She screamed, but the sound bounced off the walls and collapsed back on her like a cruel echo. Panic overwhelmed her. She kicked, punched, and clawed until her hands ached and her throat was raw. Nothing changed. Then a voice, calm, robotic, inhuman, came from a speaker overhead. "You are safe. Do not panic. You are part of something important." She froze. The words didn't make sense. Who was speaking? Where was she? The voice offered no answers, only vague reassurance. No name. No demands. Just that line over and over, "You are safe." But Elise knew she wasn't. Whatever this was, it was deliberate. And whoever had done this wanted her to feel every second of it. The box she was in was just large enough for her to lie down and turn on her side. She couldn't sit up straight. There was no light except for a dim glow that flickered on and off unpredictably. Sometimes it was total darkness for hours, sometimes the lights returned for a few brief minutes. It disoriented her completely. There was no clock, no way to tell night from day. Time became a concept that unraveled in her mind. Once a day, though she couldn't be sure of the intervals, a metal hatch above her head released a plastic packet of water and a gelatinous gray paste. No flavors, no utensils. Just enough to keep her alive. The water tasted like iron and the gel clung to her teeth, thick and bitter. She had no choice but to consume it. Hunger and thirst stripped away dignity quickly. Within the first week, Elise stopped caring how she looked or sounded when she cried. She simply wanted out. But it wasn't just the physical constraints, it was the mental games. The voice returned irregularly. Sometimes it asked questions. What is your name? How does it feel to be alone? Do you believe someone is coming for you? Other times it played sounds, traffic, birds, the ocean, even laughter. Elise didn't know if they were recordings or live feeds. Each sound carved a deeper hole in her sanity. They reminded her of what she had lost. There were no human interactions, only the occasional sound of footsteps above or the faint clinking of tools. She shouted, begged, cursed. No answer. Just silence. Then the voice would return like a cruel puppeteer checking in on his creation. You're doing well. Your strength is impressive. Days blurred together. Elise began marking time with scratches on the metal wall using her fingernails, but even that became useless once her nails wore down to the skin. Sleep came in fragmented cycles, often interrupted by fear or thirst. She started talking to herself just to hear another voice. She recited memories like bedtime stories, birthdays, conversations with her mother, the first day at university. Anything to hold on to a sense of identity. But the voice kept trying to take it from her. You're not who you were before, it said once. You're becoming something stronger. This is a transformation. In her clearer moments, Elise began to realize this wasn't random. Her captor didn't want money. He wasn't torturing her physically, at least not directly. He was studying her. Observing her reactions, pushing her limits. She remembered that first line, you are part of something important. That was the key. This wasn't chaos, it was control. On what she believed was the 30th day, a small screen flickered to life on the ceiling. A grainy black and white video began to play. It was a security camera feed, her walking to work weeks ago. Then another clip showing her unlocking her apartment. A third showing her talking to a friend at a cafe. She screamed when she realized what it meant. He had been watching her long before the abduction. The video ended. The voice returned. You were chosen. I saw something in you. This isn't a punishment. It's a study in resilience. The realization struck her like a hammer. This man wasn't just cruel, he was methodical, possibly brilliant, and entirely detached from normal empathy. He believed what he was doing had value. And Elise was just a subject to him. She began trying to manipulate the system. She noticed that whenever she screamed for long periods, the voice didn't come. But when she remained calm, it sometimes responded. So she experimented. She pretended to be docile, agreeable. I understand, she said once. You're trying to teach me something. Hours later, the screen turned on again. This time it showed a live feed of the woods above. Trees. A breeze. A deer moving through tall grass. It was brief, Just seconds, but it was the first proof she had that the outside world still existed. She wept at the sight of sunlight. Her mental strength became her weapon. She resolved to survive, not just out of instinct but to destroy the man who had done this to her. She began crafting stories in her mind, preparing for the day someone found her. She memorized every sound, every phrase the voice used. If she survived, she would be his undoing. By the time day 83 arrived, though she didn't know it, Elise was no longer the same person who had walked home in the rain. She was ragged, yes, and broken in places. But deep inside her, something had hardened. Her terror had transformed into something sharper. She wasn't just trying to live anymore. She was waiting for a crack, a flaw, a mistake. And above ground, that mistake was quietly unfolding. On what would become her 83rd day underground, Elise noticed something unusual. The speaker that normally broadcast the cold, synthetic voice had gone silent for over a full cycle. No questions. No manipulations. No mechanical humming. Just silence. Even the food hatch hadn't opened, and that terrified her more than the voice ever had. The routine, however cruel, had been constant. Now it was breaking. Something was wrong. Above ground, Victor Doss sat at his monitoring station, expressionless, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. A tiny red light blinked on the corner of his screen. There had been a glitch, small but significant, in the airflow system's control board. His custom rig, which fed oxygen into the underground box, had experienced a brief shutdown before automatically rebooting. The damage wasn't critical, but it had forced him to reset the backup generator manually. He cursed under his breath. Mistakes were unacceptable. This was supposed to be the perfect experiment. The data had to remain clean. But in that moment of mechanical failure, something else happened. For a brief 30 seconds, a secondary channel he had left open for testing, a speaker line connected to a different room in the cabin, was mistakenly activated. Elise, far below, heard something. Not the robotic voice. Not another psychological game. A phone ringing. Then a voice. Human. Mel. Speaking too fast to understand but real. Not a recording. Then it cut off. It wasn't much. But it was enough. That voice gave her something she hadn't had in weeks. Confirmation that he was nearby, that there was someone else, that there was possibly a way out. She stopped screaming. Stopped banging on the walls. She went still, silent. Listening. Meanwhile, miles away at the Ashland Police Department, Detective Hannah Royce reopened Elise's case. A recent break-in at a nearby property had led officers to revisit old surveillance tapes from various neighborhoods. Royce, methodical and intuitive, noticed something strange in one of the tapes. A white utility van parked at a distance during the initial volunteer search effort for Elise. It wasn't marked, didn't belong to any registered volunteer, and had no obvious link to the case. But when she had the plates run, they came back to an inactive registration under a false name. She followed the lead quietly. No media, no partners, just caution. A few more searches and property records later, she found the name Walter Greaves, linked to a parcel of land on the outskirts of town, a small, privately purchased site with no active building permits. When she drove by the place late at night, her headlights caught the faint glint of a motion-activated camera buried in the trees. Victor noticed the car immediately. His system flagged the license plate before she even got out. He watched her on his monitors as she walked the perimeter, careful but determined. He recognized the threat instantly. He began powering down the system in the cabin, preparing for the worst. Elise's oxygen would last, maybe a few more hours without additional ventilation. But he was ready to abandon the site if it meant preserving himself. Down below, Elise felt the shift. The silence had deepened, become absolute. The small pulses of airflow had stopped. She felt it in her lungs. The air was thickening, heating. Something was happening. She kicked the ceiling with what strength she had left. Then she screamed, not in panic but in rhythm. 3 screams. Pause. 3 more. A signal. Morse code maybe. She didn't know. She just needed someone to hear. Detective Royce had nearly given up when she heard it. Faint, rhythmic thuds coming from below her feet, near a rusted metal plate half covered in leaves and debris. She froze, crouched, listened again. More thuds. A desperate, determined pattern. She didn't wait. She radioed it in, called for backup, and began tearing at the ground. Victor fled into the woods. But he hadn't prepared for this. His system had worked for nearly 3 months. He hadn't planned an escape because, in his mind, there would never be a failure. As the sound of sirens closed in, he ditched his van and disappeared into the forest. His experiment was over. Hours later, after emergency crews dug through the packed earth and reinforced metal, Elise was pulled from the box. Pale, emaciated, eyes sunken but alive. The medics wept. The officers stood silent. She had survived something unimaginable. She didn't speak at first. Her throat was damaged, her body weakened. But her mind was clear. She told them about the voice, the screen, the recordings. Every detail. And when she was handed a photo of Victor Doss, a man no one had ever suspected, she nodded slowly. That was him. Victor was found 3 days later hiding in a drainage tunnel 2 towns over. He didn't resist arrest. In interrogation he spoke coldly, clinically about his research. He referred to Elise as the subject. When asked why he did it, he said, "I needed to know how far a human mind could go before it broke. And I was right, she didn't break." The trial was long, public, and emotionally draining. Victor never expressed remorse. But Elise testified. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp. "You didn't break me," she said to him across the courtroom. "You built the cage. But I walked out of it alive." The aftermath wasn't clean. Elise struggled with anxiety, nightmares, and long stretches of silence. But with therapy, the support of her community, and an iron will that had carried her through the darkest place imaginable, she began to rebuild. She started speaking publicly, about survival, trauma, and the power of the human spirit. Her story became more than just headlines. It became a symbol. A reminder that even in the most hopeless darkness, even buried and forgotten, a person can still fight to be found.